welcome to our tutorial. So in this tutorial we're going to look at making a sci-fi kind of corridor and that we can build to print on an FDM printer. So with no further ado, let's have a look at a few things. So in Blender, I'm going to turn on my keys so you can see what I'm doing. And so the first thing I'm going to do is delete the default cube. Now we'll add one in a bit later, but just for now, I'm going to turn on the show tools, and I'm going to import a file or import a 3D model. So I'm going to go to my desktop, and I think it's in here, open lock files, and then it's that one I'm looking for, and there it is. It's huge. Okay, so let's have a little chat about this. So this is Thingiverse, and Thingiverse is a website where you can download all sorts of models for all sorts of interesting things for tabletop playing, etc. And you'll see here there's different sort of iterations of the open lock system. So this is a very simple one here, open lock columns and side locks. You can see there's a small clip here that you would print, and then each of these pieces has the ability to take this clip so you can join things together so that you can make interconnecting terrain like this here. So you can choose to download this pack here or whichever one you want, and then you can print these components and put them together. Now obviously the only problem with that is you're just reusing the designs made by other people. So in this case here it looks like the inside of a dungeon, and this one's also sort of a dungeon. This one looks more kind of it's a cyberpunk, so you could use that. So what we're going to do is, so I've already downloaded that and I've imported this piece here. So I'll have a little chat about scale. So if I open Cura, which is my slicer of choice, so this is the software that is going to speak to the 3D printer. So if we open that and we import this file, so we hit open here and we go to my desktop and in here and open lock files, and we find EA. So if I import that, that is the correct scale. So what I could do in Blender is I could remake my default cube and then scale this to fit it, or I'm going to remake my default cube here. You can see it's not quite the right scale, so I'm going to press S and scale this up. So you can see here I need to scale it up about 50 times, and so to do that I press S, 50, and enter, and we can refine the size of this a little bit later. So I'm going to press G and Z and move it up. I'm going to move this along my x-axis and place it there. Now we can see that this is too big, so again we'll scale it till it's approximately the right size, and we're there. So I'm going to press S again to scale until I'm matching the outside, and then I can go up. Now there's lots of ways to do that more accurately, so I can actually go measure things. So this is saying this is 76 meters long, but to do it by hand I've found is probably the quickest. And what we're looking at here is more methodology than anything else. We can go GY, move that to the edge. Okay, so that's our starting point, and we will get rid of that and move back to here. Just very quickly jump into wireframe mode, and yeah, that's all good. Okay, so what we want to make is, or print, is a 3D corridor on top of this, that we can then merge these two objects, make them a single object, and export it as an STL file. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply my scale, because if I don't, I'll get weird errors when I use box cutter. So I'm going to press Control S. Nope, that's not what I'm going to press. Press Control A, sorry, and apply scale. Losing my mind. There we go. So now the scale of this, if we look over at Tool, at View here, it's the scale of the object is 111. So if I were to scale this up, you can see the scale here changes. So now we're at a scale of 1, we can actually go do a bit of work. So let's go and select Box Cutter. If you haven't used Box Cutter before, then I would suggest you go get it. It's an amazing plugin for Blender that makes kind of hard surface modeling really, really easy and really enjoyable and fast, and you get amazing results very quickly. You do have to pay for it, but it's not very expensive. It's about €40. All things relative. That could be very expensive depending where you are, but as 3D software goes, it's not expensive, and I think it's well worth it. So I'm going to click on this tool here, which is an N-gon, so I can cut a shape. So I'm going to start here, and we'll draw, and so what I'm doing is I'm basically creating a cutter, or a shape that's going to be cut out of this cube. And we'll start with that there, and then we can just slide it to the side and cut it out. So that's our starting point for our 3D corridor. Now if you look at Thingiverse, or if you go online and have a look at some of the models out there, you'll find that there's you have options. Some tabletop games that use miniatures only use half walls. They don't use a roof like this for various reasons. I mean, if you've got a 3D miniature in here, how are you going to move it if it's got a roof? Like, so if we have two of these joining each other and a corridor, then how does the player reach in and take out the miniature? So we may end up cutting this back a bit, but for now we'll just look at it here, and just for scale, and I'm just going to import another STL here, just so you have an idea of scale. So if I had a 3D miniature character, now this particular character is at 28mm scale, so if you play kind of Warhammer or any of those tabletop games, that's the sort of scale that this character is at. So that's sort of what we're talking about in terms of the corridor size. So that's how big our corridor is compared to our miniature. So I'll just delete that. So let's select our corridor here, and then let's do just make this a little more interesting and involved. Now, the thing to remember when you're cutting, unlike normally when you're modeling, you have to kind of very cognizant of what's possible to print and what's not possible to print. So with that in mind, if I print this with a roof, I'll have to fill in everything in between. So that's going to make for a really interesting print, but it's also going to mean that I'm going to waste a lot of plastic. trying to print a roof. So what I might do just for now is cut this off. So we will, what's the easiest way to do that? So I'm going to draw a box here and just take this out. And then on this, I'm going to press Q for hard ups and go mirror on Y. So now we're going to make a half corridor. So if the character was in here, we could reach in and take it. And also in terms of printing, this is going to be a much easier print to make. Now, this is a standalone piece at the moment. If I had other wall pieces, I'd have to make sure this was the same height as them, so that we didn't have an uneven surface as we went along. But since it's our first piece, we can comfortably have a play here. So let's do some cutting. So I'm going to take this and bring it in. And what we're trying to do here is introduce, I suppose, a level of complexity to the model to make it look believable. I'm going to press T and B for bevel. Now, depending on the type of printer you have, it may or may not be able to print that sort of level of detail. So if you've got a very basic kind of FDM printer, that sort of detail might be too small, so you might have to instead, when you're using that particular tool, the T tool, you may have to extend the border. So you can see here it's a larger border around this piece. Where's B to bevel? Place that there. And we're going to try and print a kind of grid on the floor. And again, we don't want to get too close to any edge. If we make borders that are too fine, the machine or the printer will struggle to print them. Now, okay, so for this one, we're going to do something slightly different. So I'm going to draw a box here, and I'm going to bring it all the way along, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key and left click to keep it active, and then I'm going to rotate it, and I just press G, place it about there. So I'm kind of making a, maybe I'll move it in just ever so slightly. So this is a little bit thicker, so it'll print more in a more stable print. And then inside that, in a moment, I'll add a couple of cables to make it look like there's something going on in there. So again, there's no real rationale to these except to make it look like somebody's actually designed the area. Okay, and we'll put this over here. I don't have to go all the way to the side because I've got the mirror on. Okay, and then we'll put in a little kind of hole here as if there's a handle for someone to come along and lift this edge. And so we're just trying to add in, I suppose, slightly asymmetrical details. That'll make it look like it's designed. Okay, so I'm not going to do much more than that in terms of 3D printing. So I'm going to add in a one or two cables into this. So the easiest way to do that is I'm going to look from above and I'm going to add in a Bezier curve. So let's jump into wireframe so I can see it. It's very small. That's it there. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees and then scale it by say 20. So that's it there. I'm going to press G to move it, and so it's not in the right position at all. So we're going to go G, move it up here, and then if I go into edit mode, I'm going to go GY and move this to the end. Same with this, GY. And then if we look from above, so I was basically trying to straighten it because it starts with a curve in it. So that's my line, my Bezier curve. So I'm going to click on the properties here of the curve, and it says full. So under geometry, I'm going to make it thicker. So I'm going to go back into solid mode here. Nope, that was offset. I clicked not extrude. So it has extruded, and we need to give it some depth as well. And I think we need to make this, yeah, so that it's rounder. It's still very thin, and it's not going to print well. So let's see if we can make that 2. Okay, and maybe by 0.1, slightly rounder. Okay. So, and there's numerous ways to do this. If you make a cylinder and do it that way, you know, that's equally fine. But you can't do this down with the cylinder. You can't curve it, so that doesn't look completely symmetrical. So I pressed A to select all the vertices. All of the points. And I can go Shift D, Shift D, and Shift D, and then we'll go in here and see if we can just move these back a little bit to make it a bit more, to look a little more real. Okay, so they're my cables. Now what I need to do is I need to go Object, Convert to Mesh. So now they're a mesh, and I'm just going to go to wireframe mode here. I'm going to select them. I'm going to delete those vertices, take these, and I'm going to put SY0 so they're all lined up. I'm going to go GY so that they don't protrude at the end, so that they're connected, so the next piece beside it won't get pushed away by them. I'll delete them. Again, SY0 lines them all up, and that's fine. And then finally, I'm going to put in this little cube here at the end to kind of seal this piece. The easiest way to do that is actually use this itself. So I'm going to, if we look over here, we can see all of the Boolean actions we've put on this. So I'm going to apply them, and then I'm going to apply the hops mirror. Now I can go into edit mode, and you can see that it's all of those things have been applied. So I'm going to press 1, 2, 3, 4, and go Shift D and then escape. P, separate by section. So now I've made a separate object, which is this here. I can select it and press F and then extrude along it. So if you look in here, you can see so I can place that object there. Now I'm going to join it back. So I'm going to press this and go Shift J, and then it isn't on that side, but if I reapply the hops, the hard ops mirror, you can see it's jumped onto that side. So now I've got my cables going through, and my corridor is complete. Now, depending on depending on the printer you're going to use, this may not print out well, or it may print beautifully. If it's a resin printer, this will, it'll look lovely. If it's not, if it's an FDM printer, it may struggle to print that. Now, we could do all sorts of nice things. We could cut a hole here so there's a walkway that we can look under. But again, you'll be challenging your printer to create that level of detail. So then finally, I'm just going to apply again all of them. If we look at the base of this, so I'm just going to go GZ20 so we can look under it. I haven't joined them yet. So this has two faces here at the bottom. If I select this guy, this has a lot of faces. So I was going to move this back down, so GZ minus 20. And we'll join these cables. So Control J. So to get these two to join, there are various kind of things we can do. The geometry doesn't really match. Depending on how well you want it to print, you can simply just join them, export an STL, and it will print. And that's what I'm going to do now. And what we should really do is remove any internal geometry. So we should remove the two faces at the bottom of this and all of the faces on the top of that, and then join the two together. And that is very possible, but it would take a while. So for this first look at making tabletop terrain using this system, we won't do that for now. So I'm going to take my terrain and I'm going to take this here and I'm going to go Control J. And you can see immediately that something terrible has happened. So let's undo it and see why that happened. So there are no modifiers on this. So let's go Object, Shade Smooth, and you can see it looks similar to what we had when we joined them together. And then we can shade flat. So let's join them together again, Control J. You can see that's happened here, and we can go Object, Shade Smooth, and then Object, Shade Flat, and we're back to what we wanted. So this is now one complete object, even though it's in effectively two sections. So we can export this as an STL. So we can go File, Export, STL, and we'll call this Sci-Fi Core, and we'll put that into not to our characters, STL model. So we'll just put it in here. So Sci-Fi Corridor and export. And then before we finish up, what we'll do is here in our slicer, so this is where we send our 3D models before they can be printed, we are going to open up what we've just made there, which is this. You can see it's quite small, it's like half a meg, and this is what it has produced for us, which is very interesting. Aha, okay, so I'm glad we did that. So let's delete that. Oh, actually, we'll leave it for now. Let's have a look at why it did that. So when we were exporting the STL, we didn't click this button here, selection only. And then what that means is all of these things here that we can't see, all the cutters, so if I turn them off and turn them back on, all of these bits of geometry that we use to cut out our corridor, they will also be exported. So in Cura here, I'll delete that. We'll do that one more time. So I go File, Export, STL, and this time we'll go Selection Only, Sci-Fi Corridor, and Export STL. And now when we jump into Cura, we can open and select the same file, Sci-Fi Corridor. You can see it's slightly smaller now. We've got rid of some of that junk we didn't need. And here it is. If we make a little bit of room for it, So you can see where there's red, it's saying it needs support, so it'll print some support in there, but there's no support needed for this main channel here. So, and there is no supports needed in the OpenLock system in here. So if you print with supports, you'll get weirdness. So you don't want to do that. Okay, so I'm going to finish the tutorial now, but we'll be coming back to look at different ways to create tabletop terrain using the OpenLock system that that you can use for your games.